Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Brian O'Connell.
And I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And today we're going to talk about No Country for Old Men, a 2007 thriller by the Coen brothers, Joel and Ethan, based on Cormac McCarthy's novel, and starring Tommy Lee Jones, Javier Bardem, and Josh Brolin, with cinematography by notable cinematographer Roger Deakins, who just won an Oscar for 1917.
Oh, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, no, I think he won for Blade Runner as well, but he's worked with the Coen brothers and done a lot of memorable, influential pieces of cinematography for various films.
Yeah, I mean, he does great work. So unless you've lived under a rock, most people know that No Country for Old Men is a film that won a lot of awards that the Coen brothers did. Arguably their most famous film.
I would say so. That or Fargo.
That or Fargo or The Big Lebowski.
Oh, yeah, maybe The Big Lebowski. I haven't seen it, but that is one of the few that I regularly encounter references to in just conversations with other people.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say in terms of critical acclaim, this is the one that everyone thinks of the Coen brothers for.
Yeah, probably.
It's an interesting film in that if you have I've watched a decent amount of the Coen brothers films, and you can see their kind of quirky sensibility at times, but for the most part, it's, in our last episode, we talked about, for instance, editing, and how there's some schools of thought that think that you shouldn't notice the editing in a film. And this is very much very stripped down minimalist. Yeah, there is a score, I think, but they mostly used wind.
Oh yeah, minimalist. I did some research before this episode. I only saw it this morning. I think it said there's about 16 minutes of music, and that's it, in total.
Yeah, and it's a 2.5 hour film.
Yeah, 2 hours too. Yeah, it's lengthy, but I don't know. So I mean, this is kind of a thriller of the kind of sideways thriller that the Coen brothers like to do.
Yeah, I almost think of it like an anti-action movie, in that the traditional action movie,
yeah,
it's more about how cool the hero is and how badass he looks, shooting people, and it sort of glorifies the violence. Whereas No Country for Old Men is just there's no fanfare about anything. It's dogs get shot and people get shot and people get shot off camera. One of the heroes gets shot off camera. We don't even see it.
Fair spoiler alert. We're jumping right into...
Right. Yeah. You probably figured this out by now, but spoilers for No Country.
Yeah. You see Anton Chigurh, who's... Javier Bardem won Best Supporting Actor for it, but I feel honestly he's one of the leading roles more than anything else. He's not a side presence in the movie.
Yeah, because he's one of the main...
he's the first...
For most of the film, it's Josh Brolin and Javier Bardem. Javier
Bardem is the first person, I feel of the principal characters that we see.
Yeah. I mean, the first one that lives.
He's the, to me, and I think the film also recognizes this, the kind of dark nexus of the whole thing, especially with such a brilliant, mesmerizing performance from Javier Bardem. I mean, I was blown away. I haven't seen him in, I think, anything else.
This was really the performance that put him on the map, and arguably, I know he's been in other films, but I have a hard time thinking of what else he's been in.
I know he was in Mother.
Yeah, he was good in Mother.
I mean, I've heard about him for a while. I haven't seen any of his films outside of this, but in this film, he's just a total abyss of a human being, it's almost mystifying how just empty he is. One of the most memorable psychopaths you could put to film I've ever seen.
Yeah, I would say so. And I've read the book, and he's very much the same character in the book.
Yeah.
I watched an interesting video on YouTube that compared No Country for Old Men to The Seventh Seal.
Oh, interesting.
And the character of Anton Chigurh as basically death.
Yeah.
And they had an interesting note about the hairstyle, it sort of looks like a cowl. It's an interesting take. I think one of the big things the Coen brothers like to do, speaking to their quirkiness, is they have people with just bad hair. That's just a Coen brothers thing. So one of the main Coen Brothers touches. Because in the book, they don't, it's a very stripped down book from Cormac McCarthy. But there's never really a mention of, like, overtly how he looks, It's never like he had a bowl haircut.
I mean, it's a distinctive choice to have this, like, otherwise, like, very menacing and physically imposing figure, and then he just has this, like, awful child's haircut.
I do think of it as serial killer hair.
Yeah.
For instance, I know the Coen brothers didn't actually work on this, but the Fargo TV show, which is great, by the way, they have Billy Bob Thornton in it, and he's got similar terrible hair. It's just kind of, like child's hair. It's like he's just got bangs that he does nothing with and just looks kind of silly. But it sort of speaks to, like, the type of person no one would mess with, like the type of person that knows no one's going to give them all that much crap about it, and if they do, they'll probably just kill them.
Yeah, actually, that makes sense.
So it's kind of like, they don't care what their hair looks like, because they'll just kill you if you make fun of it.
And with this character specifically, I mean, he'll just kill you for just about anything, or sometimes nothing.
Yeah, I guess you could say he loves killing people, even though his affect is very flat, and you don't always get the sense he feels much.
I mean, because with serial killers in film, you get various motivations, like it could be like a psychological or sexual impulse. But I mean, when I was watching him murder people in the film, which he does quite a lot, there's a lot of it. I didn't necessarily get the sense that he was taking pleasure per se. I mean, not that he wouldn't be, but it just like totally, he just does it like as if it's just what he has to do. It's kind of complicated to articulate.
It is, because on the one hand, and I've done a little bit of research into serial killers, and he reminds me of Richard Kuklinski, who was known as the Iceman.
Oh, I've heard of him.
He was basically an enforcer for the mob, like a contract killer. But he was similar in that he seemed like a total sociopath who didn't really feel all that much. He was just like, well, this is my job, so I'm going to go do it. And as such, they interviewed him, and he never really, I don't know, I don't think he ever got the sense he was a serial killer. He always just says, yeah, it was my job. I was hired to kill these people, so I killed them. And he kind of compartmentalizes it like that. And he's an interesting case because he had a wife and kids. There's a story about him Christmas Eve. He gets a call about a job, so he, goes out, kills a guy, and then comes back and he's opening presents with his kid and his wife, like nothing happened.
It's bizarre. And I mean, I guess that's somewhat similar to this character in that this character is a hired killer of a type, but he winds up he kills his bosses.
Yeah, he kind of goes rogue. Like, he's initially hired to kill this person, track down this person. And then I think he just is like, well, it's just going to be easier if I kill everybody, so I'm just going to do that.
Well, so I think the opening scene, which is narrated, I think, directly from the McCarthy novel by the...
It is. One of the only notable differences from the book and the film is that in the book, each chapter starts with Sheriff Ed Tom Bell having a little monologue. Whereas they, I think, wisely chose to kind of pull it back for the film and make it more of a film about all sorts of different characters.
Yeah, it feels, at least for the majority of the film, fairly equally divided between the sheriff, the farmer, and Shigur. That, you're kind of cutting between these three perspectives without really focusing on one more than the other.
Exactly, yeah.
But his opening bit, where he talks about sending a kid to the electric chair for killing his girlfriend, for killing another child, and the kid says, "Oh yeah, I've always wanted to do it, and I'd do it again, and it wasn't a crime of passion. I just wanted to do it," I think is important to understanding the kind of just almost nonchalance with which Shigur kills people. I guess if I had to apply a metaphorical reading to it, he's just this ungovernable, ununderstandable spirit of like destruction, almost, that he just lays waste to everything he comes across with, like, thoughtlessly.
Yeah, he does. And I'd like to go sort of in order with the plot, so I'm not going to bring it up until a little later, but I do have some interesting thoughts about the nature of him as a human being, even if you could see him as that.
Yeah, I think the the final scene with I forget Josh Brolin's character's name.
Llewellyn Moss.
Oh yeah. I think his scene with Llewellyn's wife is very telling in that regard, but we should go in order.
The plot is fairly simple. It's Llewellyn Moss, played by Josh Brolin, is out hunting one day, and he happens upon this drug deal gone wrong, and everyone there, well, mostly everyone there is dead. There's one guy who's alive who asks him for water in Spanish, and he says, "I don't have any agua." And he's a hunter, so he tracks this blood trail to find the last person who's still alive. And he tracks this person to under a tree and finds a briefcase full of $2 million.
Hit the jackpot.
And so
he takes this money.
He takes it, yeah. I mean, if Anton Chigurh is like the spirit of destruction, I would say Llewellyn Moss is like the spirit of like not thinking anything through with any consequences.
Yeah, I mean,
he's just kind of like, oh, money, I will take the money. There's no thought about his safety or his wife's safety or anything.
He just, yeah, it's a foolish move, but the thing that struck me early on, and this grew more complicated as the film, took various twists, but it felt almost fable-like. Like this poor farmer finds a bunch of money, and, he's basically virtuous. I mean, we don't get to know much about his life before this incident, but he seems like...
No, I mean, for the most part, even throughout the film, even though he has to do some things, he seems like a decent enough guy.
He seems like, and you kind of, I mean, at least from my perspective, you kind of want him to have this money. I mean, just this everyman poor farmer is gonna, hit the lucky jackpot for once, and he's gonna have a good life with this money. Obviously, that's not what the film has planned for him, because there are various people after this money.
We briefly meet Carla Jean Moss, played by Kelly MacDonald.
Excellent.
Who has an excellent performance, by the way, but who is Llewellyn's wife. In the book, they kind of go into a little more that there is an age difference. There's obviously a little bit of an age difference in the film.
Yeah.
But in the book, it's really like I think she's even younger in the book. In the book, she's like 20 and he's like 40 or something.
Yikes. Well, I mean, their relationship was kind of left somewhat... I mean, obviously they're married, and that you can see that she is younger than him. But, as soon as he comes home, he's like, you have to go stay with your mom for a while, and you don't really get as much of a sense of what their life was like together before, again, because you're immediately thrown into this situation.
No, you don't really get a sense of their relationship dynamic. You sort of piece it together as the film goes along.
And I don't mind that necessarily, because this is a film, and, a novel obviously needs to be compressed for like a 2-hour movie in order to work. But the thing that struck me in those early minutes was just how, I don't know if entertaining is the right word, but it's like, it's pretty immediately gripping and straightforward about like what the experience is going to be like, at least for most of the film. And that it's going to be like a kind of cat and mouse, weirdly subdued, but still like exciting thriller type suspenseful scenario. And I was kind of surprised by how just sheerly entertained I was for most of the film.
It's one of those films that is very cinematic, and that a lot of the time it's relying solely on visuals.
Oh, yes.
There's not always a ton of dialogue. There are long stretches where there's no dialogue. It's not like a traditional action movie in that, the hero has some kind of one-liner and then the villain says something and they have a shootout and there's like a standoff. There's no one-liners happening. It's like they're just firing at each other.
In fact, you don't even... I mean, Chigurh and Llewellyn never really even properly, meet, honestly.
No, they talk on the phone.
That's it.
I want to say twice.
I feel like... I think it's only once. After... Is it? I think it's just...
It might only be once. He might have talked to his wife the other time.
Oh, yeah. You're probably right. But it's really just... when they're in the same room together, they're shooting at each other. It's not, it's not like a traditional action movie like confrontation between like the hero and the villain. It's just like, oh god, he's here, gunfire.
As much as I'm a sucker for even, cheesy 80s action movies with that sort of dynamic, there is always a part of me that was like, okay, so you're the villain and you want to kill this guy, yet you're just standing here vamping when you could have just walked in and shot him. And this is sort of the logical end of that, where it's like, yeah, no, if he's in the room, he's trying to shoot you.
And I think the film is better for that. Although I wouldn't say gloating, but Shigure does have his moments of philosophizing with his victims immediately before killing them.
Which usually has to do with the flip of a coin.
Yes.
When there are characters where he doesn't have to kill them, it's usually he decides it by the flip of a coin. He makes them call if it's heads or tails.
It's the scene with the gas station attendant, like, what's the most you ever lost on a coin toss? That was the scene I knew the movie for.
That's probably the most famous scene.
Because it's nail-biting to watch, because obviously adhering to the principles of like Hitchcockian suspense, something that the gas station attendant doesn't, which is that Shigure is a murderer, and that if this guy loses the coin toss, he's going to get shot.
But one of the things that's so fascinating and compelling about the scene is that as Shigure keeps talking, you can see this gas station attendant slowly realize, like, wait a minute, who is this person I'm talking to? And by the end, he might not know he's a killer, but he knows he's in trouble if he gets the coin flip wrong.
Yeah, because Shigure's, it's, again, a lot of it is due to Bardem's performance, just the graveliness of his voice. Like, he's speaking about it. Like, nobody talks about a coin toss the way Javier Bardem is talking about a coin toss in that scene.
Yeah, what's interesting, too, is I think, I'll just bring this up before I forget, I really think this is one of the best book adaptations to film I've ever seen. Because if you've read the book, I've seen the film twice now and I've read the book.
I haven't.
There is really not much I can think about that's different. And right down to the dialogue in the coin toss, the only notable thing is, in the book it's, what's the most you've ever saw someone lose on a coin toss? In the film, it's what's the most you've ever lost on a coin toss.
Yeah. So that was, we were kind of bringing it up earlier. I've generally liked the Coen brothers films that I've seen, although sometimes the quirkiness, as you were talking about, kind of irks me because it feels a little more contrived.
Yeah, it's the very definition of contrived. It's very forced. I like it, but it's much more so in their earlier films. There's a very specific kind of tone and editing style and dialogue style that is sort of stripped away for No Country for Old Men.
Well, so I think that, again, I haven't read the book, but it being an adaptation may have focused them maybe more on the specifics of what they were trying to do, or provided a new angle on it, because while I still felt that I was watching a Coen brothers movie, it does have a lot of those trademark sensibilities to it. It definitely is of a slightly different, just general flavor and tone than something like, I don't know, Blood Simple or Fargo, despite the shared director team.
While we're talking about the coin toss scene, the only other notable difference I can remember is in the book, it's very clear that it's nighttime. And so when the gas station clerk says, when he asks what time do you go to bed, he says 9, and he's talking about how he has to close because he closes around nighttime. It sort of makes more sense. So when you're watching this and it's clearly like noon and clearly not going to be dark for quite a while, and the gas station clerk goes, well, I gotta close. And the guys, and Chikagura asks him, when do you close? He goes, oh, about dark.
Yeah, that was a little confusing to me.
It's I think, to emphasize that he's so scared that he's not even making any sense.
Yeah, he's not thinking.
Like, he's just really trying to get this guy out of there by any means. So he's like, oh, I have to close, and doesn't even think about the fact it's like, well, obviously it's not close to dark.
Yeah. I mean, the sense of that he's just stumbling over his words in an effort to get out of there. That actually feels very something that somebody would do in that situation, that they would be like not thinking through what they were saying just because they were petrified by this.
And there's sort of a comedic undercurrent to it as well.
Yeah, I could see that.
Where initially it's like the guy is just so bumbling that you're sort of on Shigur's side because you're like, wow, this guy's an idiot.
Well, I mean, you feel that this is a kind of Coen Brothers-y thing, that Shigur encounters various like irate people who just. I remember I don't know what her job was, but he goes to this woman asking her where Llewellyn works, and she's just like, I'm not going to tell you. It's my job. I'm not going to tell you. And she's being like kind of snippy with him. And I was just convinced that he was going to murder her, but he just walks off, which, I mean, I think that's part of the suspense, is that sometimes it's a toss-up.
Yeah, sometimes he doesn't kill someone. He's sort of this force of nature where you can never tell when he's going to kill someone.
Yeah.
If they're not, his immediate target.
Yeah. I don't think it was Shigur who killed Llewellyn, was it?
I think it was supposed to have been him.
I was confused because there were several other hired parties that were after the money.
There were, and that is also straight from the book where Llewellyn is killed.
Well, so that's
off page. You never actually get the scene. You never read a scene where Shigur walks up and kills him. It goes from Llewellyn's talking with the girl who offers him a beer. In the book, it's a little more drawn out, like they're actually sitting together and talking for a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think they even drive to a different motel. And he's just, he's just lonely. So he hangs out with this teenage girl to just have someone to talk to. And then it cuts to the sheriff finding Llewellyn dead in the hotel room.
When I saw the film, that scene where he's talking to the girl by the pool, it ends with like a fade and then it cuts back to the highway. And I was like, for 5 seconds, I thought, oh, that was a weird fade, like kind of an odd transition to put there. And then, 10 seconds later, you realize, oh, he's dead.
Yeah, I think what's supposed to have happened was Shigur showed up and maybe the Mexican cartel had already tracked down Brolin, but I think Shigur shows up at the same time, and even though it makes no sense, he kills some of the cartel members and then kills Llewellyn, which is why the cartel members are hauling ass when Sheriff Ed Tom Bell shows up.
Oh yeah, because they kind of, and it looks like they're wounded perhaps. Yeah, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I read this criticism of the film by some reviewer who saw it when it came out, that like, oh, they don't even grant Llewellyn like the dignity of a death scene, like they just kill him off screen. But to me, I think the fact that you see Shigur kill so many people, like very violently, constantly across the film, but that Llewellyn, it happens off screen and he gets to end on that moment of like smiling at that girl and like, he's making some sort of connection despite the terrible situation he's been put in. That to me is like a supreme act of dignity to give the character when you've seen so much bloodshed otherwise across the film.
If you've ever had anybody you know or any relatives die, it's obviously you want to see them before they go, but there is a part of you that thinks, would it not be better to just remember them how I saw them at Thanksgiving and that's the last memory I have of them? Because when you see them in a certain state in the hospital or, hooked up to a machine, you can't help but that's sort of still in your head when you think of them. So it's the same with Llewellyn, where if you had seen him get shot, that would have stayed with you. That would have been the last thing you remembered from him instead of, him smiling and being happy.
Him smiling at this, like a light window of contentment in this sea of violence and terribleness. I mean, I think that applies to a lot of the film, because I do think, despite like the fact that Shigur ultimately seems to triumph or at least escape and get to continue on existing, I do think the film is seeking out these moments of human connection and, I don't know, some sort of hope despite the unremittingly bleak circumstances of their characters.
It's true. I do want to play devil's advocate on the off-screen Llewellyn death. You could also see it as he's just like one of the dogs that got killed off-screen.
Oh.
That people are just animals, and they're taken down the same way that animals are, and there's no fanfare.
That's fair. I don't think the film ultimately takes a side on, I mean, obviously they're not supporting Sigur, but, you know, whether it's a purely nihilistic film or something that has some sort of respect and dignity for human beings, it's unclear because the battle is notably unresolved at the end. You have the sheriff still alive, but, you know, in despair, basically. And you have Sigur escaping and presumably continuing his killing spree across the country.
But all of that relates to the title of the film and the book. One of the main themes of No Country for Old Men is the concept initially that maybe things used to be simpler and now things are so complicated you don't know which way is up. Which we, by the way, have kind of clarified for us by the end of the film. Tom Bell is talking with, I think it's his uncle?
Yeah, I think so.
Talking with the character of Ellis, who's some sort of relative, and explaining why he quit being a sheriff. And Ellis explains how he got shot and ended up in a wheelchair. But then he goes on to talk about I believe it's their grandfather, or one of their grandfathers, who Tom, I guess, probably had the opinion that things were simpler back when he works. But Ellis sets him straight and says, no, he got shot in the back. A group of people came up one time. He went up to try to get a shotgun. He got shot in the back, and he got shot through the lung, and he slowly died over the course of the night. Then I think that's important because one of the themes running through the film is that there is this concept that maybe things used to be simpler, and there's intentional visual nods to the Westerns of old where it was someone with a white hat, someone with a black hat, things were simple, good versus evil. And the film goes out of its way to show you that things were probably never like that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, as I was saying earlier, perhaps somewhat obscurely, but conversation is helping me work through it. It starts off as a fairly, at least for me, you're rooting for the good guy, and you're against Sigur. You're rooting for Llewellyn, and you're hoping Sigur is stopped. But the film really complicates those boundaries the longer it goes on, and Sigur, ultimately nobody is able to tame him. Nobody is able to stop his just pure lack of empathy or respect for human beings from just continuing to run rampant, which could go back into that generational theme. Like, you know, his grandfather, Bell's grandfather, was plagued with the same swath of murder and crime, and it's just something that will always be with human beings.
I think it's in the book and the film, but there's a very telling line that Ellis says. I would say if there's anybody who's sort of speaking to the themes of the film, it is someone like Ellis. And it's very notable that you meet him at the end. And he says, this country's hard on people. It's always been hard on people.
Yeah.
And that's sort of one of the themes of the film is that America is a tough place full of people that will kill you and you'll just die like a dog.
Yeah. I think, to me, the key scene in the film, what really, I mean, there are several, including the one with Ellis, but the one that really struck me upon watching it was the scene between Carly and Sigur, where she comes back from the funeral of her mother, and Sigur is waiting for her in her apartment or house or whatever, and she says the same things that the other characters have said before they died, like, you don't have to do this, which doesn't mean anything to Sigur because he knows he doesn't have to do this, and that's the point. But I find the scene where he does the coin toss and he says, call it, and she says no, and he says, you have to call it, and she says, it has nothing to do with the coin. You know, the coin doesn't have any say over it. It's you. It's your choice. I think that's maybe the boldest refutation of Sigur's thing in the entire film.
It is the closest that Sigur sees to a takedown. It's the only loss he takes Well, arguably that and the car accident he gets when he breaks his arm. But those are the only two losses he takes.
Yeah, and I think his sudden, like, his whole manner changes very briefly in that scene, because you can see she's calling him out on his bullshit, basically. I mean, that he's acting as though he's some, just principle of nature that, it's beyond his control. He's just this incarnation of destruction and punishment and death. But she's like, no, it's your choice, which has been obvious across the film, but I think it's phrased so powerfully in that scene, like, it's not up to the coin, it's up to you.
In a weird way, Carla Jean Moss is the only one who has any sort of victory over Anton Chigurh. She does get killed. It's very obvious that she gets killed.
The fact that he kills her, I think, proves her point, ultimately. That no, he's going to do this terrible thing, and he's going to choose to do it, and that she's not making the choice for him by calling the coin.
Yeah, and that is where she gets any type of victory from, is that no, she's not going to make it seem like it's up to her. It's not up to her, it's up to him.
And that is, I mean, I don't know if it shakes him in any meaningful way, but it is a pretty sharp counterpoint to the other types of murders we've seen. I think it's notable that she also dies off screen, like Llewellyn.
So she has the dignity of the last thing we remember from her is her taking down Chigurh and saying, no, I'm not going to play your game. You can do what you want, but I'm not going to play this.
I think there's another irony in the immediately ensuing scene where Chigurh gets into a car accident while leaving her house and then has to rely on the basic charity of some boys who are biking, and they give him their shirts to like bandage his wound. And it's just, he's been this like menacing, almost like monster-like figure throughout the entire film, and yet here he is relying on the basic human goodness of two, children in order to keep on going. And I think that is a kind of textual counterpoint to his philosophy. Although I don't know if the film ultimately decides which one is more, I guess, influential or powerful in the world, the nihilism of human beings or the sense of community.
I think the point of the film is that, much like life, you're never really going to know. They leave it up to the individual person. So if you're a nihilist, you'll probably think, oh, this is confirming my nihilist worldview. Or if you're a positive person, you're going to go, oh, this confirms that there is positivity in the world. There are people that stick up to Chigurh that live.
I'm not a positive person by any means, but I think that the fact, life wouldn't be worth living if there weren't any element of human goodness in the world. And I think the question the film leaves you with is this sense of frustration in living with a world that's so constantly plagued by evil and by injustice and by violence that Chigurh is going to keep going, and even after he dies, there will be somebody else to take his place across the generations, and that there will always, in this country, as Eliot says, be a dark, destructive impulse. But I think the film provides just enough glimmers of the human spirit to make it a little more complicated than a purely nihilistic statement.
Right, because there's also the scene where Josh Brolin's been shot and he wanders into Mexico. And this is actually, when he comes to, this is one of the more overt Coen brothers things, but he comes to after passing out from losing blood, and there's a mariachi band who starts to play, and they only stop when they see that he has this like enormous bullet wound that's bleeding from his side, and they all kind of like comically stop playing at the same time.
Yeah, but they get him medicine, don't they?
Yeah, but he gives them $100 and he's like, Medico, and then he passes out. And if the film was purely nihilist, he could just die right there.
Yeah.
Or he would come to and he'd still be on the street. But he doesn't. He wakes up in a hospital. So those people were clearly, even though they had nothing other than the $100, they didn't have much to gain from helping that guy.
No.
But they helped him anyway.
And there's, of course, again, very Coen brothers, but when he's crossing the border, the guy who is the border agent is giving him a hard time, like, you can't come across here. I get to decide who.
I mean, to be fair, he has no pants on. He just has hospital scrubs.
But
hospital scrubs and boots.
But when
and he doesn't have a wallet or an ID.
Yeah. But when he mentions that he was in Nam, this guard has some sort of solidarity with him that allows him to help him. And there are these tiny acts of people at least having some basic empathy with each other that, they aren't as frequent as Shigur's unremitting violence, because the world, unfortunately, is a more violent place than it is a charitable one, ultimately. But it's leaving you with the question, like, are these little moments of light worth all of the agony that they've been put through? And I think it doesn't ultimately give you an answer, because the conflict is unresolved at the end.
The conflict is the point of the film, I think, in that everyone has to decide for themselves, why would you keep going in a world that is obviously so violent and brutal? And maybe it is just for the light moments of levity and connection. Another interesting character we haven't talked about yet is Woody Harrelson's character of Carson Wells.
Oh, yeah.
He's another person that has one of the lighter moments in the film where when Llewellyn wakes up in this Mexican hospital, Carson is there and he's brought him flowers. I guess presumably as a joke, but it's still, it's still fairly nice.
Well, they have like a small talk.
And he has there's a lot of things that Carson could have done because he's obviously been hired to get this money back. But what he does is he warns Llewellyn, like, look, you fucked up. This guy isn't going to stop even if you give him back the money. So if you help me, if you give me the money, I will make sure that you stay alive.
Yeah.
I'll do my best to make sure you're okay.
Reasonable guy.
And again, it comes down to Llewellyn making decisions. And he says, no, I'm not going to do that. And you wonder, what would have happened if he did go with Carson? Like, let's say he was like, okay, fine, I'm in over my head. And Carson even says, I'll let you keep some of the money.
Yeah.
Like, that's more than fair. You stole
super fair
drug lord money, and this contract killer is desperate to murder you. And this other contract killer is like, I will literally save your life.
And give you some money.
For this thing you did like an idiot, and you can get money out of it. But he turns it down.
Well, so that's the thing. I think the film ultimately, it's an existentialist film in the traditional Sartre Beauvoir sense, I feel. In that it's about the decisions. Like, especially in regard to Shigur, it's about the fact that these people aren't just principles of like primal urges that just express themselves. They're making choices. They're making deliberate choices that have an effect on their life, whether it's...
that have deliberate consequences, yeah. And you wonder what would have happened if Llewellyn agreed and gave Wells the money. It would have been the two of them, so maybe they could have ganged up on Shigur when he shows up at the hotel.
Although I think it's implied that perhaps Llewellyn would have died anyway, because Shigur is just a crazy, evil person who wanted to kill him because of the inconvenience, I think is what Wells says.
Yes, but I'm saying, what happens if he teams up with Wells? They're both clearly skilled. They know how to shoot a gun. If it had been 2 against 1, even though Shigur is...
Well, he killed those 3 Mexicans.
He did. But then you get into another, like, well, let's say he did give Wells the money, and let's say Wells just got killed by Shigur before he could help him. Or even if they did team up, what happens if those 3 cartel members showed up and they got machine guns?
It might have turned out entirely the same way. Obviously in life, in real life, all choices will ultimately culminate in death, and everybody has to make their peace with that in some way or another. Because, maybe Llewellyn gave the money to Wells, and they beat Shigur, or maybe Shigur killed them, and maybe it would have mattered for nothing at all. But I think it's just about the various, just that these characters are active agents, even if Shigur is pretending like he's not an active agent, that, it's up to the coin toss. All of these characters are making individual decisions that they have to take responsibility for, ultimately. definitely. It's fascinating in that way.
We're getting around the 1 hour mark, so I just want to bring up one interesting theory briefly that I had. And it's something that I think I told you already. It's something I love that the Coen brothers do in a lot of their films. But what they will do is establish this larger than life character, often a murderer, and they will have one scene, often the last time you see the character, where something presumably supernatural happens, and you're kind of left to decide whether or not that character was ever supposed to be a real human being. And this is sort of a stretch because that if it had ended with the hotel scene, right, where Ed Tom Bell goes back to the scene of the crime and he's waiting outside the hotel room. He goes under the police tape and he's waiting there, and there's this shot of Chigurh inside the hotel room.
Yeah, and it's lit like a creature feature almost. Like it's like a horror movie lighting.
Yeah, like he's in the darkness. So there are a couple interpretations. It could obviously just be it's in Sheriff Bell's head and he's picturing what could possibly be behind the door. But a more interesting interpretation that I have as a fan of the supernatural is that what if Chigurh was in the hotel room, and what if he was able to just somehow get out of a locked hotel room?
It's an ambiguous moment.
A lot of people would argue, well, it's supposed to imply that if he was in the hotel room, there's a window, so he could have snuck out the window, even though the sheriff checks and the window's still locked. There might have been a way he could do that, and he does find a coin, so it's like, oh, maybe he flipped a coin and decided I'm not going to kill this guy. But there is an interpretation where Chigurh really is this force of nature. Like, he really is, like, he's not human.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know McCarthy is beloved by a lot of horror writers. I've heard him mentioned in, various... I was at this Bryant Perk thing with 5 horror writers like 2 summers ago, and when asked what the scariest book they ever read was, like 2 of them were like, oh yeah, Cormac McCarthy, The Road, or something like that. But Chigurh is like kind of like the modern equivalent of like a devil or a boogeyman or something like that, and that whether or not he's actually supernatural or not is up to debate, but either way, he represents this very like I use the word ungovernable, uncontrollable evil impulse, to the point where like in his sheer mercilessness, he seems like almost supernatural in his evil.
He does, but there is another interpretation where you could actually see him as having the most integrity out of everyone else in the film.
Well, because he has those principles.
The reason he goes back to kill Carla Jean Moss is he says, I promised your husband. And she goes, my husband is dead. And he goes, that doesn't matter, basically. So it's like he's holding up this promise he made.
Yeah, well...
However crazy. Like he has a very clear, maybe not always the most clear, but he has a clear set of morals. And those morals come down to decisions and come down to chance. And come down to, if I say I'm going to kill someone, even if I told someone who is dead who wouldn't know, I'm still going to kill that person.
Yeah, and so, I mean, this is a more subjective judgment, but that's his whole... I mean, I think that's what keeps him, what allows him to do this, is the idea that, what he may be doing is awful, but he's doing it based on some sort of system of logic or moral code, however distorted that may be. Like, there's a reason he does the coin toss. He keeps all of his promises. When he offers the coin toss to Carly, he's like, this is the most I can do, as if the choice were already made and that he's just offering her a possible out. But I think her refutation of it really calls that into question, that no,
I think it's one of the only times in the film he's actually shook. Like, one of the only times in the film you actually see any form of fear cross his face.
Yeah.
Because that's the only time where you can tell in his head, he's like, wait, am I just insane? Because he could think of the coin as like, oh, that's fair. That's what a normal person would decide to do. It's up to chance. It's not up to me.
Yeah.
But it's the only time in the film where he's like, oh shit, maybe I'm just a crazy person.
Yeah, maybe there wasn't a point to all of that. Maybe his ideology, his philosophy is totally arbitrary and ridiculous and not something a sane person would do. And I think, again, that scene where the whole movie, he's been a force of nature, just a hurricane, like driving through the country, killing people, and seemingly unstoppable. He's suddenly reduced to an injured man on the sidewalk. And in that moment,
and it comes down to chance again. It's if this kid isn't going to help him, he's probably not going to get away. But his luck is in his favor, and the kid happens to give him a shirt.
But in that moment, to me, he suddenly just becomes a human being who is just making bad decisions. He's no longer...
Yeah, suddenly he becomes like everyone else in the film.
He's not like some demonic, predatory, like, evil supernatural force. In that moment, he's literally just another injured person who needs to rely on just basic human charity for survival.
He is, and I think that is one of the main reasons that the supernatural interpretation doesn't hold up as much as I wish it would, because the end of that film is to show you that he is just a human being.
It's an interesting lens, I think, but I think that the lens of the supernatural, but I think just more metaphorically than anything else. I mean, it's a way of showing that, whichever philosophy you have, whether you're a Bell who is driven by some sense of moral integrity and passion for justice, or if you're a Shigur who is totally nihilistic and devalues all human life, or if you're a Llewellyn who's just out for himself and wants to get some money and make it big, ultimately, all of these characters are just human beings that are struggling in like a merciless, difficult world. And I found that tremendously powerful to see.
One last thing I'd like to bring up is the scene with Carla Jean Moss where she refuses to play the coin game, and the next scene where he gets in the car accident are very much related, because I didn't notice this on the first time, and it took me watching this certain YouTube video to notice. What color is the light when he gets in the car accident?
The light?
It's green. It's a green light. He's obeying the rules. He's obeying the same rules that he's given to everyone else, that it's up to chance. That if you call heads and it's heads, you don't die. If you call heads and it's tails, you do die.
Oh.
He's following, and he makes a point of telling Carson Wells before he dies, if you followed the rules and the rules led you here, what good were the rules? And that harkens back to the coin flip when Carla Jean says it's not up to the coin, it's up to you. Again, if you're following the rules and the rules led you to that, then do the rules really matter? And then when he leaves, this is one of the few times in the entire fucking film that he is obeying the law, that he is actually obeying. He looks like he's going the speed limit.
Yeah.
And he's going through a green light like any of us would. And bam, that's when he gets hit by a car.
Yeah, it's just a total random accident.
Totally random. So it sort of reiterates that there really is there's no system. It's all chaos.
He may be behaving as if he's some chaotic principle, but he has his own system of rules. And those rules, when you're hit by a car, turn out to be just as bad as any other system of rules. He says, as you said, he says to Wells, like, if the rules were good, if the rules got you here, what good were the rules? And that's a valid question to ask to Wells, but it's also a valid question to ask to him. Like, nobody's system of rules seems to work in this movie.
Yeah, and I think one of the main points of the film that you learn by the end is you might think that there's some kind of order, that if someone's good and they deserve to live, they will live. Or that if someone's mean to Shigur, he will kill them.
But no.
But by the end of the film, you realize none of that holds up. It's all sort of random.
Yeah.
And if you take away the coin, it's just
a guy killing another guy.
It's just Shigur deciding if he's going to kill someone or if he's not, kind of arbitrarily.
And that terrifies Shigur. And you see Bell, questioning whether or not it's worth it continuing to be in law enforcement because he's faced with such an awful reality. But ultimately, I think it's like a tremendously empathetic film in a weird way, in that this is the situation we're all faced with. We're in a world that's seemingly chaotic, choked with violence and despair, and you question, why you even get up in the morning to such a, I know today, especially over the past few weeks, I've been questioning my purpose in life for a while.
Right, and it is sort of like, to tie real life to art, you do sort of realize when there's a weird virus pandemic that's killing people
that the rules are made up.
That the rules are kind of arbitrary. That you have this, you think, I need a job, I need to work hard at my job, I need to have a strong relationship, I need to do this, I need to do that. And you realize, no, you don't really need to do any of it. We kind of just collectively agree to these concepts of money. I mean, even time. Time is a concept that we've all agreed to.
Time has lost all meaning for me.
But yeah, time is completely subjective. When you're working from home, has it been 2 days? Has it been 4 weeks?
I don't care that it's April.
Yeah, I think that's sort of the point of the film, too, is that we have these rules that we sort of have to keep us going, to make us feel like there is like we have some form of control over the world. But very quickly, when we're faced with something terrible, we realize, oh no, we don't really have any control ever.
Yeah, but I think it's significant that this question is something given to every character in the film, including Shigur, who initially is mostly the challenger, on the offensive. You know, he's the one who's unsettling our notions of what constitutes order and what constitutes chaos. But I think the fact that he is also challenged at the end, that, you know, maybe his rules are just as bad as anyone else's rules. Maybe all rules are insufficient to the messy reality that we're faced with. I think that's a really powerful and thoughtful statement to put into the film. And I don't think the film gives you an answer ultimately as to what approach is best.
No, because I think it would lose a lot of its power if it overtly had a scene that let you know, like, definitively, Shigur is in the right, or Llewellyn is in the right, or Ed Tom is in the right.
Yeah, if Bell had caught Shigur, like, then it seems like good triumphs over evil. Or if Shigur, you know, killed Bell, killed everybody else, then it would seem like a purely nihilistic statement on, you know, the all-powerfulness of evil and despair. But the film ends on a note of continuing struggle for all of these characters.
And it's important that the film has the question posed to all of the characters about, are you safe? And ultimately, I feel like, even though it's ambiguous, it's heavily implied that no one is safe. It doesn't even matter if you're this ultimate badass, which is what Carson Wells describes Shigur as, or I think he compares him to the plague. Both, but ultimately it doesn't matter who you are, because you can still, obeying the law, get in this terrible car accident that might level you out, and you're actually obeying the law for once.
So, and I mean, again, I don't think the film provides an answer, and this is my subjective take, but I think the thing that, at least I rely on in order to find any sort of stability or purpose in life myself is those small windows of just solidarity with other human beings. Those little tiny, moments in a sea of bullshit where, the border guard lets you through because of a shared experience, or the children give Shigur, the worst person ever, a shirt to bind his wound.
And this kid too, he doesn't just give the shirt because he's getting paid for it. He offers his shirt before, and Shigur kind of makes him take the money.
Well, so
this kid's just going to give him his shirt off his back.
That's the other thing. Shigur offering the money is making it a transaction that, you give and I give, take and give, all of that. But it's almost like he can't accept the fact, which is in its own way just as chaotic and random as anything else, that the kid would just give his shirt just to help. He can't accept that. It has to be for something. It has to be like a rule that, if you give me something, I'll give you money. And that's how it goes. It can't just be that the kid just gives the shirt. It can't be that a car just hits you when you were going through a green light. There has to be some sort of structure to it for him. And that's, it's a remarkable film.
It is. It's a really remarkable film. And I think one of my main takeaways, again, subjective, but even though the film sort of implies that no one is safe, in the same regard, it implies that everyone is safe. Because there are plenty of people in this film that you think, oh no, they're going to die, and they don't.
It's random. It's all random.
It is, and what the film does, and it's deceptive, but what's brilliant about the film is it initially has all of these decisions that people make. And you think, oh, the reason that Llewellyn is having this happen is he decided to take the money. But there's also a universe where Llewellyn doesn't decide to take the money, and he gets killed anyway because Shigur just happens to show up at the same time.
Yeah.
Or he gets shot by one of the drug dealers. Or he gets shot by the guy who asked for water. Like, he comes back and the guy's still alive, and he goes to give him the water, and the guy shoots him.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, the thing I mentioned Sartre earlier, I'm thinking of his concept of freedom a little bit. And the idea that, I may be getting the nitty-gritty of it wrong, but that all of these characters are faced with a reality that is just totally unstructured, chaotic, random. Anything could have gone wrong at any other moment. And that this, what Sartre might call total freedom, the fact that these characters, there's truly nothing holding these characters responsible ultimately, causes people anxiety, that they want to impose rules on their life, that they want to try and provide some sort of order to the mess, but ultimately, regardless of whatever rules you impose on the mess that we're all faced with, it's your individual decisions that comprise who you are. And you can't put that on the universe. You can't put that on another person. And you can't put that on whatever moral or philosophical code you've imposed on yourself. It's you. It's you.
No, we all just try to do the best we can. And there is a reason that we have these rules. Even if you might think that Shigur is right, that what good are the rules if they got you there? What's the alternative? Is the alternative none of us have any rules and it's total chaos? Well, the point of the film is kind of that it's total chaos anyway. So you kind of have to have something to go off of, even if it leads you down the wrong path.
Well, because Shigur is going off his own rules. Shigur is just as terrified by this randomness as anyone else.
No, and it's a very humanizing moment, those last two scenes. You see that, he really has doubt. Nowhere else in this film does he have any lick of doubt. He knows what he's doing. He knows his code. He knows what he should do. And then by the end of the film, he has no idea. He's just hobbling off with a broken arm.
He feels he knows why he's doing it. That it's just, this is the way it is. It's the coin toss. It's whatever. It's his principles. But his encounter with Carla, who refuses to play his game, and then the ensuing car crash and shirt giving from one of the boys, I think disturbed that notion for him, just as his actions have disturbed Bell's notions of justice or order. And that's just, that's the question the film poses to all of us. Are our beliefs, our rules, as absolute as we like to think they are?
And I don't know. And that's the beauty of the film. And it's a well-paced film. Even though it's 2.5 hours, you barely feel it.
No, it's like
It moves very... And it doesn't even move quickly is the thing. It's not like it's a ton of really quick cuts. It's just the narrative is so engaging that you lose yourself in it.
Yeah, we've been talking about the weightier thematic elements of the film. And there is a lot of violence and gore, but it is something I would classify as a popcorn movie. It's an entertaining, compelling thriller.
Yeah, it manages to pose these deep philosophical questions while also just having really cool set pieces and action scenes, while also...
I was enjoying myself. I was like, this is a blast.
Yeah, the whole thing with Shigur using...
The cattle thing.
The cattle thing that pokes a hole, that became so iconic. People remember the movie for that. Or the shotgun he uses with a silencer. People remember that image. So there's a lot of stuff in it a lot of stuff in the film that is just very dynamic, divorced from any type of narrative at all.
Yeah. Just the suspense as he's approaching the motel and the tracker is beeping. And we didn't get to talk about it that much, but I would like to shout out just the gorgeous cinematography by aforementioned Roger Deakins.
It's beautiful, and he does something that's apparently very difficult, but he has these great scenes that are almost in total darkness.
Yeah.
Which I've heard is very hard. There's this really great scene where Llewellyn is in a hotel, and he's asked the clerk to call him if anyone shows up. and he goes to call the front desk and no one answers. So you get the sense from his Josh Brolin's face, like, uh-oh. He has a sense something's wrong. And he hears someone outside his door. So he shuts the lights off because he's going to see it's very Hitchcockian. He's going to see under the door, and the shadow of the person will let him know when they are there, and that's when he will shoot them. But Chigurh gets wise to it. So right as Llewellyn is kind of aiming his gun, Chigurh shuts the lights off outside. So suddenly he has no real way of knowing when he's going to show up.
It's so scary when that happens. It's like genuinely nail-biting and like thrillingly entertaining in the best sense of the word. I mean, it's like classic suspense filmmaking from two excellent storytellers. 3, if we're including McCarthy.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great film, but obviously people know it's a great film. I mean, it's had so much. It's not like this is a movie that just came out. This has been around for now, 13 years?
Yeah, it was 2007, so yeah, 13 years. Yeah, don't be like me if you haven't seen it. Which, if you haven't seen it, how? But otherwise...
I mean, the thing about the Coen brothers is I can understand people not liking all of their films.
Yeah.
There are even times when I'm watching their films where I'm like, this is a bit extra, guys.
Yeah, I don't go for all of their films.
But they are clearly incredibly talented filmmakers.
And I feel, I mean, barring the gore, but anyone could watch and enjoy this film, I feel.
I think so, yes.
Like, it's fairly accessible and gripping to, I guess, general audiences, in spite of the nausea-inducing amount of blood in certain scenes. But otherwise... it's a thrill ride.
It is. And yeah, on that note, thank you for joining us here at Celluloid Citizens. We will be having many more episodes to come, and hopefully some of them will help you while you're hunkered down trying to avoid coronavirus.
Yeah, I know I've been listening to some podcasts and watching movies.
It's good. It's good to have an escape. If the film teaches you anything, it's that you can't overly worry about stuff because stuff's just going to happen anyway.
Stuff's just going to happen, but you can decide what to do in response to it.
Exactly.
I'm Brian O'Connell.
I'm Sean M. Thompson.
Thank you.